So good morning to everyone. And I think this is indeed the 22nd year that I have the privilege, the honor, and the simcha to share with you Divrei Torah. And I think this room becomes smaller from year to year. And it is an honor and a privilege that I really cherish. I've been more times in Bnai Yeshurun and Teaneck than in any other kehillah in America. And really, I thank Chaim, my dear friend, also known as Henry, Chaim Olinsky. And the very first time we met, and I said, Henry, and he corrected me and he said, Chaim. So Chaim, where are you? I don't see you. As always, next to the door, standing in a corner. Thank you. It means so much to me. And I look around and I see so many familiar faces and so many dear friends. Rabbi Newberger was, I think, the Rosh Kollel, leading the Kollel here every summer. And thank you. Thank you for having me this morning. So we are already in the 9 days. 9 days of mourning and 9 days in which we all remember the tragic events that happened 2,000 years ago. And at the end of Masechet Tanis, the Gemara says, Kol hamitabel al Yerushalayim zocheh v'ro'eh b'simchata. And the Chasam Sofer asks, the proper wording would have been Yizkeh v'yir'eh b'simchata in the future tense. Kol hamitabel al Yerushalayim, Kodesh Baruch Hu will help. Ultimately, he will be there when our glory will be restored. But the lashon of the Gemara is zocheh v'ro'eh in the present. And the Chasam Sofer says the fact that we could weep and cry over Yerushalayim, tragedy that struck our people 2,000 years ago, proves that to us the past is never past. The past is always present. And Yerushalayim is not a distant memory. Yerushalayim is alive and it lives in our minds, in our hearts, in our conscience, in our neshama. So by the mere fact that we are mitabel al Yerushalayim, we see the koach, we see the potential. We know and we feel that Yerushalayim will be back. As the story goes, quoted in many sources, we never know whether these stories happened or they're just legend, but it doesn't make much difference. So the great conqueror, Napoleon Bonaparte, and he was one of the greatest rulers and conquerors in history, and he always also was considered an intellectual. He had this crazy idea of restoring the Sanhedrin, which he actually tried to implement. And he wanted to know the peoples and the cultures in the areas that he took over. And he asked to visit a Jewish temple, a Jewish shul, and it happened to be Tisha B'Av. And he was brought into a shul and he saw people sitting on the floor and crying. And he was taken aback and he asked, what happened? Who hurt you? Maybe I could be helpful. And the Jews told him, our temple was destroyed. And he asked, who did it? Where is he? Maybe we could do something about it. And they explained, no, it happened 2,000 years ago. And he was shocked. And he asked, so why are you crying? And they tried to explain to him, we're crying because we lost our Beis Hamikdash. And he said, a people that could cry and weep over tragedy of their distant past, they are promised the future. If the past is present, so is the future. Lahavdil, that is what the Chasam Sofer says, Hamitabel el Yerushalayim zocheh v'ro'eh b'simchata. Yerushalayim is alive, and it will be restored. So we are in the midst of Yemei Avelus. So as always, first a brief halachic discussion. So Tisha B'Av is a din of Yom Kippur in various different aspects, primarily in two different halachos in which Tisha B'Av stands apart from all the other fast days. Leiloi ki yoimoi. All the other fast days are from Aloisa Shachar to Tzeisa Kechovim. Only Tisha B'Av is an entire cycle of 24 hours, like Yom Kippur, starting off at the Shkia and ending a day later in Tzeisa Kechovim. The other area is Tov Kuf Nun Dalet. I would appreciate if I could have a Mishnah Brura Chelekov, the last Chelekov Mishnah Brura. So, Uborois, Umenikois, Misanois, Umashrimos, B'Tisha B'Av, like Yom Kippur. Thank you. So pregnant women and nursing women are required to fast, unlike all the other fast days in which they are exempt. Tisha B'Av is an exception, like Yom Kippur. And then we have a sif dealing with people that are ill. Sivav in Simetov Kuf Nun Dalet, Chaya Kol Shloshim Yom, V'chein Choyle Shu Tzorech Lechoil, Ein Tzorech Oimed, Ela Machilen Oisoi Miyad. So a person that is ill on Tisha B'Av, you don't need to ask a doctor for an assessment evaluation. Does he need to eat? Might there be a sakana incurred or no? No. If he isn't feeling well, he's sick, he's ill. Machilen oisoi miyad. The b'mukam choli lo tazru rabon. In a case of illness, lo tazru rabon. So the decree of Tisha B'Av, the takon of Tisha B'Av, does not apply. There are three different interpretations in this halacha. So Reb Chaim Brisker, the great Reb Chaim of Brisk, his interpretation was, if you're ill, you have no Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av wasn't meant for you. So once in Shas, only one sugya, we have the concepts of Utra and the Duhuyo. I have difficulty sometimes translating halacha concepts in English. I would have no inkling how one says Utra or Duhuyo. Is the prohibition pushed aside? Does Choli override the mitzvah of fasting in Tisha B'Av? Or fasting in Tisha B'Av is just not relevant if you're ill? So the story goes, a person once told the brisker of, I'm not feeling well, I have a medical issue, and my doctor said I can't fast on Tisha B'Av, but I do want to give it a try. And I hope I'll feel well, I plan to fast on Tisha B'Av. And the Briskerov told him, that's great, but don't forget Kabbanas Tanis of Tisha B'Av. And he meant to say, you don't have Tisha B'Av. But Mukam Choyli Loi Gazru Rabbanan. If you want to fast anyway, just bear in mind it's a Tanis Yochid. And if it's a Tanis Yochid, you need Kabbanas Tanis by Mincha a day before. So the Briskerov's comment, which was a cynical comment, is along the lines of Reb Chaim Brisker. And his understanding of these words, B'mukam choili loi gazru rabona, means that for the ill, there is no Tisha B'Av. You are exempt. The more classical understanding is the Aruch HaShulchan, and that would be a gather of Dechuyo, not Putro. If you're ill, you don't need to fast. And that is similar to some other areas in halacha in which Chazal were lenient with the Choyle She'ein Boi Sakana. In Hilchos Shabbos Shin Chof Chesif Yud Zayin, we learn Choyle She'ein Boi Sakana. Chazal were lenient in the prohibition of Amira Lenachli. Choyle She'ein Boi Sakana. No, his life is not in their jeopardy. There's no sakana, but nevertheless, Chazal were makel by Amira Lenachli. That definitely is a gather of the Chuya. In Socham Chof Hey, we learn Choyle She'ein Boi Sakana could eat macholas asura shelo kederech achila. So the more classical approach is Choyle Ain't tzorach. He doesn't need evaluation. He could just go and eat. It's not a gather of chutra, it's a gather of the chuya. And the Briskerov's cynical comment, don't forget Kabbalah Stan, said of Tisha B'Av would not really be relevant according to this approach. Number 3 is a chumrah that we find in Shalas Teshuvas Divrei Nehemiah, and I need to give a brief introduction. The Mishnah Berurah and Bnai Halacha on this very seif, B'mukam Choyle Loi Gazra Labanan, Ayin B'Sefer Pischei Olam. The B'mukam She'eina Machla Shel Cholera Chazaka Chas V'Shalom Yoichel Toches Mekoiseves B'Kedei Achilas Pras. So the Mishnah Berurah quotes a sefer Pischei Olam that when the epidemic of cholera is not very rampant and very widespread and dangerous, then you should eat Pochas Mekashia on Tisha B'Av. Nowhere do we find a concept of Shiurim and Tisha B'Av. We are all familiar with the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Tov Reish Yud Ches, which is based on a Mishnah Masechet Yuma, Chodesh Yesh B'Sakona, that needs to eat on Tisha B'Av should try to eat Pochas Mekashia, but we don't find this halacha in Tisha B'Av. It only applies to Yom Kippur. But the Mishnah Berurah does bring Pochas Mekaseves B'Toich Kedei Achilas Pras. So we need to give the context of this tshuva, which I don't think the Mishnah Berurah was aware of, because I want to share a secret with you, which not many people have realized. The Mishnah Berurah didn't have a big library, the Chofetz Chaim. And I think when he decided to write his sefer, Mishnah Berurah Shulchan Aruch Chaim, he either borrowed or purchased most of the Sifrei Yesod and Shulchan Aruch Chaim. And those are the Sforim he quotes in almost every seif. The Mama Mordechai, the Choik Yankov, the Yeshua's Yankov, the Mugen Geboidim, Shulchan Aruch Harav. And those are the basics, the fundamentals in Shulchan Aruch Chaim. He had no Shalas Teshuvos. And whenever he quotes Shalas Teshuvos, he relies on one of two Sforim. Pischei Olam, the sefer he quotes in our seif, or Pischei Tshuva. We have Pischei Tshuva on Yoredeya. The equivalent to Pischei Tshuva on Yoredeya is the Shari Tshuva on Orach Chaim. But there is a very small book, a very small sefer, Pischei Tshuva on Orach Chaim. He was a contemporary of the Mishnah Berurah, and so was the Pischei Olam. The Pischei Olam was a Rav in Lithuania, Rabbi Karasik, I think related to the Karasiks we all know, to Mark and George Karasik, our dear friends. And the Mishnah Berurah, whenever he quotes Shalas Teshuvos, he relies on one of these two Sforim. And these two Sforim were not medactic. And many times they quote or misquote Shalas Teshuvos, and that's the way it makes it into the Mishnah Berurah as well. Many misquotes of Shalas Teshuvos. So the Mishnah Berurah wasn't aware of the source of this halacha. He quotes the Pischei Olam. The Pischei Olam quotes the Divrei Nehemiah. The Divrei Nehemiah was a Talmud and a Chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek. And he writes a tremendous chiddush. In his opinion, only a choyle sheyesh b'sakona could eat on Tisha B'Av. Only if his life is in jeopardy. The only difference between Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, ein tzorech oimei. In Yom Kippur, you need to ask a doctor, how much do I need to eat? Is drinking enough? Or I need to eat as well? Because in most cases we are familiar with today, there really is no need to eat on Tisha B'Av. It's far more common that a person eats fluids, and not drinking might endanger his life. It is less important to eat. So the Divrei Nehemiah deals with the question of a choyle she'ein bo sakana, and his interpretation of this seif is choyle she'tzorech lechor. How do we define she'tzorech lechor? So according to the Divrei Nehemiah, he needs to eat because otherwise his life might be in jeopardy. Ein tzorech oimei, which means you don't ask a doctor how much he needs to eat. Would drinking be sufficient? Does he need to eat as well? Pochas mekashia kashia. That is the understanding of ein tzorech oimet elo machina neisabad. But if it is clear that his life is not in danger, he cannot eat on Tisha B'Av. And that Tzemach Tzedek agreed with his Talmud, the Divrei Nehemiah. And this psak, Yochel Puchas Mikashia, was given in the time of a cholera outbreak. And the psak was everyone should eat, not only those that are ill, but everyone. Minchas Osher on Corona. 6 years ago, 5 years ago, after a year of Corona, Minchas Osher Shalos Shuvas on the COVID pandemic came out. At the time, it was a bestseller. Today, nobody looks at that sefer, and I think people are afraid they might get COVID if they learn the sefer. So I just want to let everybody know you're not going to get COVID by learning that sefer. And I wish more people would still learn it, because most of the most fundamental shuvas I wrote about sakana and pikuach nefesh are in that book, in that sefer. So I discussed this at great length, because there were many similarities to the pandemic we witnessed just a few years ago and the cholera outbreaks that ravaged Europe again and again and again every few years. So the psak was everyone should go eat, and not only those that were ill. And the psak was based on two fundamentals, two different and distinct fundamentals in halacha. The first argument was, maybe you're ill, but you still aren't aware of it, because sometimes it takes time for the symptoms to manifest themselves. But maybe you were infected and you need to bolster your immune system, and therefore the psak was a blanket psak, everyone should eat. And not only those that really had the symptoms and they fell ill. The other argument on which this psak was based, if only those that are sick will eat, we are afraid that people will try to be from. And many people that are not allowed to fast will say, well, let's try, I will fast. And the famous story of Rabbi Sol Salanter on Yom Kippur, getting up on the bima in the middle of the shul and making a bracha and eating on Yom Kippur, which caused a huge controversy. And Rabbi Tzalal Kohen of Vilna, who was 40 years old and Rabbi Sol Salanter, disagreed with that psak, and he voiced his dissent. So that was Yom Kippur. The Divrei Nehemiah and the Mishnah Berurah deal with Tisha B'Av, but the psak was everyone should eat. So Minchas Osher is a fascinating tshuva I wrote about a crazy story. A person that was ill, his life was in danger, and the doctor said he needs to eat on Yom Kippur. But he was from, and there was no way to convince him that he needs to eat. He was at the beginning of Alzheimer's, and sometimes he forgot for what day it is. And his son was telling him, Abba, you need to eat. And he said, it's Yom Kippur. And his son said, no, you're mistaken. It's not Yom Kippur today. And then he tells his son, okay, if it's not Yom Kippur, I want to see you eating, and then I'll eat. That's a true story. And the son asked, should I eat? Am I entitled to eat? Because otherwise my father won't eat. And this is a very uncommon question. I only have one source, and that source is in a periodical, a Kovetz Teironi. Today we have hundreds of them, but that was written more than 300 years ago in Amsterdam in the days of the Halachic. Did any of you visit the Portuguese shul in Amsterdam? It's one of the most magnificent shuls in the world. And I've been in Amsterdam many times. Every time I come to Amsterdam, I visited the Portuguese shul. It was built by people that fled the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition, and they went away all the way up north to Amsterdam, and they built that magnificent shul. And next to the shul there was a beis medrash called Eitz Chaim, and that beis medrash was 350 years ago, and they still have this wonderful library there, Eitz Chaim, and a koivis was printed more than 300 years ago. And young Talmidei Chachamim participated in that koivis, and there is an article there exactly about this question written by an anonymous scholar. We will never know who he was. And he paskins that you can't eat. And I disagree. I say, just like by Chilul Shabbos, I am a Chilul Shabbos to salvage the life of another person. Why would Yom Kippur be different? And if the situation is clear, if I won't eat, his life will be in jeopardy, then that would be a heter for me to eat, just like I have heter to Chilul Shabbos to save another person. It's an uncommon scenario. And definitely I say, try to fake that you're eating. You could put food into your mouth and then turn around and cough it out. But so the psak was everyone should eat, because the Gedolim were confident. If not everyone would eat, many of the people whose life are in danger will try to abstain, and that would be a pikuach situation. So the psak to eat pochas mikashia doesn't apply to people that are ill. At din of shiurim, we find only b'yom kippur and on Tisha B'av. But when we give a psak that healthy people should eat, definitely we should minimize the isser and eat pochas mikashia. And this is a very relevant halachic ruling in our day and age, because many times we give a heter to people to eat on Tisha B'av or even in Yom Kippur, and they are not defined as a chayla, neither chodesh yesh b'sekona nor chodesh ein b'sekona. In the third trimester of pregnancy, especially women that have previous pregnancies with premature babies or an early onset of labor, and we want to prevent premature babies, preemies, and we give a heter, these women should drink, because dehydration could cause early labor and early delivery. So if she's not sick, she's not ill. She's pregnant, and pregnancy, Baruch Hashem, is not an illness. Baruch Hashem. And nevertheless, we give a heter to drink. And in those cases, we always recommend Shuir. So, b'mukam choyle like gazer rabbanon, a choyle ein tzorech oimeid v'machila noisa miyad. That means there is no din of pochas mikashira Tisha B'av, but if the person is not defined as a choyle, and nevertheless we give him a heter to eat or drink, in that case, yes, shiurim are relevant. And that is what the Pischei Olam quotes from the Divrei Nehemiah, and the Halachos seems to ignore, because he didn't see the original text, just what is quoted in Pischei Olam. And then we find a fascinating tshuva in Chasam Sofer, Simon Kuf and Zayin in Orach Chaim. And the Chasam Sofer writes, Tisha B'av, and I wasn't feeling well, and I needed to eat or drink. And the Chasam Sofer was Mesupik, could I have an aliyah by Mincha? So the Shulchan Aruch says, regarding Tanis Bahab, Sheni, Chamishi, V'Sheni, if you don't fast, you can't have an aliyah, because there would be no Kivus Torah if people aren't fasting. Would Tisha B'av be different? And the Chasam Sofer wanted to be Oilin Torah because that was his minig every Tisha B'av by Mincha. So he wrote a tshuva arguing for three different reasons Tisha B'av would be different than Bahab, and Tisha B'av, even if you don't fast, you still could be Oilin Torah. Reason number one, svara number one. Sheni Chamishi v'Sheni B'Av, if you're not fasting, it's just like any other day. But Tisha B'Av is not only a day of fast, it is a day of mourning. Tisha B'Av is not like any other day. Tisha B'Av is a day of remembrance in which we remember the Churma of Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni. So it is a day of Avelis for everyone, whether you're fasting or not. And therefore, Kriya Satayla is not necessarily associated with a fast. Kriya Satayla is associated with Avelis, with the history of this day, with the story of Tisha B'Av. Svara number two, Tisha B'Av, we have Chamishu Inuyim. And it is not only about abstaining from eating or drinking, it is also an Isser of Rechitza and Sicha and Tashma Shemitah Ilas Asandal. And all these are binding, even though you have a heter to eat or drink. Svara number three, which is the biggest Chiddush. And the Chassam Sofer says, even if you have a heter, you have a permit to eat and drink, but you cannot eat or drink more than you need, more than is necessary. And therefore, even if you do eat and drink, you are still Bachlal HaMis'anim. The fast still applies to you because you could only consume as much as you eat. So these are the three svoras that the Chassam Sofer argues in Tisha B'Av. Even though you have had to break your fast, you still could be oila l'toila. Svara number three brings us back to the lesson of the Shulchan Aruch. Choyle shu tzorich lechol. What do these three words mean? Shu tzorich lechol. It means that the fact you're ill is not yet a heter to eat or drink. The Mishnah Berurah writes, Shu tzorich lechol roitze loima, shu chalush v'chash v'gufay. Everybody that fasts has an urge to eat. We eat every day. And that is the reason we fast. We are supposed to feel uncomfortable. That's the goal. That's the issue. But if you feel exceptionally weak due to your medical condition, you're not feeling well and you feel you need to eat or drink, that is the heter. And many times people are ill, they have a medical condition, but they feel just fine. They have no heter to eat or drink on Tisha B'Av. And that is the concept of Choyle Shehu Tzorech Lechol and the Mishnah Berurah. According to the Nehemiah, it goes far beyond that. Shehu Tzorech Lechol to prevent sakona, potential sakona rachoika, but still sakona. So the Chassam Sofer writes, you are entitled to eat till you feel just a bit better. And when you no longer are desperate and you no longer feel that you're exceptionally shmach, then you have to continue to fast. And the Chassam Sofer turns to the Beis Din of Frankfurt to ask their opinion because he felt, I'm going to give it over. I want to have an aliyah. I don't want to rely on myself. And he didn't ask the Beis Din of Pressburg, where he was loved for a very good reason. Who would paskin against their love? We don't expect the Beis Din of Pressburg to say to the Chassam Sofer, you wrote a beautiful tshuva, but we disagree, and you need to fast. So he turns to the Beis Din of Pressburg. That was where he was born and grew up. So he admired the Beis Din of Frankfurt, and he turns to them. And obviously they agreed to the psak. So this is a chiddush of the Chassam Sofer. Why didn't he ask his Shuir? His Shuir was the good lador of the Kiva Eiga. I'll tell you why, because the Kiva Eiga wouldn't give him a heter. Not that I'm imagining, but in Simach Aleph, in Shuas of the Kiva Eiga and the Mafteches, the Kiva Eiga deals with a similar question on Yom Kippur. A chodesh sheyesh b'sakona that needs to eat on Yom Kippur, could he have an aliyah? And Rabbi Kiva Eiga gives a fascinating psak. He says, by Shachris, yes, because Kriyas HaTorah in Shachris is not associated with a fast. Every Yom Tov we have Kriyas HaTorah b'Shachris. But by Mincha and Yom Tov, there is no Kriyas HaTorah. So Kriyas HaTorah, Mincha and Yom Kippur must be associated with a fast. Because by Rosh Hashanah, by Pesach, by Sukkot, by Simchas Torah, there is no Kriyas HaTorah by Mincha. So a Chodesh Yesh B'Sakuna can have an Aliyah Shachas, he can't have an Aliyah by Mincha. If Yom Kippur falls on Shabbos, he could have an Aliyah by Mincha as well. Because Shabbos by Mincha is always Kriyas HaTorah. So once again, the Kriyas HaTorah is not necessarily based on the fast, but rather it's Shabbos. Obviously, he will need to be Mavata and Mafti Yoina. Because Shabbos, there is no Haftarah by Mincha. So you want to be rich, we understand, you need to choose. You want to be rich or you want to eat on Yom Kippur. You can't have them both, so you can't have Mafti Yoina. So if the Samseiba would ask Rabbi Kiva Eiger this Shaila, Rabbi Kiva Eiger would say no, because all three Savaras of the Samseiba regarding Tisha B'Av are relevant and even far more relevant than Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is not only a day of fast, it is a special day. A day like no other. Shabbos Shabbosar, Kates Mechilas Licha V'Kapora L'Kol Yisrael. And the source of Chamishu Inuyim are Yom Kippur, and only from Yom Kippur they find their way to Tisha B'Av. And Yom Kippur, there's a concept of Shiurim. You definitely can't eat more than is really necessary. So all three sources of some type would be relevant to Yom Kippur. And Rabbi Kiva Eiger says you can't have an Aliyah unless there's Kriyas HaTorah for another reason. So this is a fascinating thing. And I very much hope that whatever I said today should be not Megia Aloha Lamaisa for anybody sitting in this crowd. We should all be well and feel well. And these days should be transformed to days of joy. As the Morad Hasa mentioned before, when we fast on Tisha B'Av, it's not only about mourning. And the Rambam Perikei and Hilchos Taniyos writes, Yesh Sham Yomim. Maybe at another opportunity we will discuss how the Rambam uses the word Sham. Sham, literally translated, is there. There refers to space. But the Rambam, in a few different sources, uses the word Sham in a very interesting fashion. Yesh Sham Yomim Shekol Yisrael Misanem. And the Rambam writes Arbot Soimos, the 4 fast days that are associated with Churban Abayis. Shavos Betamas Asol Betevis, Som Gidalyahu, and the tragic day of Tisha B'Av. And the Rambam writes, Yesham Yomim Shekol Yisrael Misanem Behem, La'oirer Halavavois, V'leftoach B'darkei HaTshuva. When we mourn, it is not only about mourning. It is about reflection, introspection. How did we get there? And what are we required to do to fix what was broken, to rectify what was wrong? And the objective of fasting is not only to mourn the past, but to try to hasten the future. The highlight, the negative highlight of Tisha B'Av is Megillas Eicha. Tisha B'Av at night, we all sit on the floor and we read Megillas Eicha. When was Megillas Eicha written? Many people would be surprised to know it was written before Churban Abayis and not after. And Rashi, in the very first pasuk in Megillas Eicha, quotes the Medrash. In Sefer Yirmiyahu Perek Lamed Vav, we learned that the Navi Yirmiyahu wrote a Megillah and he sent it to Yehoyakim HaMelech. But the Navi doesn't say what was in that scroll, what Megillah it was. But Yirmiyahu writes a letter, a Megillah, and he sends it to the king of Israel, Yehoiakim. And Yehoiakim is furious. He tears it to shreds and he throws it into the fire. And Chazal say that was Megillah's Eicha. And Yirmiyahu writes the Megillah Beruach HaKodesh to warn Yehoiakim. Listen to the message of HaKodesh Baruch Hu. Do tshuva before it's too late. And that was Megillah's Eicha, which Yehoiakim threw into the fire. And this book was rewritten, tragically, after Chorban Habayis. So it is clear that Eicha is not only about the past. It's not only about weeping and crying and mourning. It's about tshuva. And this Megillah originally was written to prevent Chorban and not to mourn Chorban. So it is clear that is what Eicha is about. That is what Tisha is about. It is about not only mourning the past, it is about doing tshuva and being better and doing whatever is within our power to do to be zoicha to the restoration of a Beis Mikdash and to Hashras Hashchina b'Yisrael. The only mention of Dalet Soimis in Navi is in Navi Zechariyahu, and Dafke in a positive context and not a negative. And in Perek Ches of Sefer Zechariyahu, the Navi says, Soma Revi'i v'Soma Chamishi v'Soma Shvi'i v'Soma Asiri Yehiyu leBeis Yehuda leSasoin uleSimcha uleMoyadim Toivim v'Emes v'Hashalom Ahev. And what does the Reish of the Posek have to do with the Sefer? The first part of the Posek is an expression of hope, a prayer, a dream, a promise that these tragic days of mourning will ultimately be transformed to days of joy. And then the Navi says, you will ask, when will this be? And the Navi says, I can't tell you when. I could tell you how. When is up to you. Emes v'Hashalom Ahev. Try to understand what about Korban, and then you will understand how to bring binyan. Bayis was a store. The Gemara says twice in Shas about Messiah Pei, the Dora Peyalef, Shalei Baruch Hu b'Torah Techila. They didn't say Birchas HaTorah, and the Ran and the Durham explains it's totally unreasonable that Chorban Bayis was caused by a bitul mitzvahs asay. They didn't say Birchas HaTorah. Is that such a terrible sin to cause Golus and Chorban? Most of the Rishonim maintain that Birchas HaTorah is the Rabbanon. It's not even a Dioraisa. So the Ran explains it wasn't really about Birchas HaTorah, it was about Torah. They didn't appreciate Torah. They didn't understand what Torah means in the life of each and every Jew, in the life of each and every community, in the life of us as a people, as a nation. Torah wasn't appreciated. What caused Churban Bayis Sheni? Churban Bayis Sheni, the Gemara says in Yom Teftes, Sinas Chinam. Shkula Sinas Chinam Keneged Gimel Averis Hamurois Shebetoiro. So the Navi says, Emes v'Shalom Ahevu. When you will learn to cherish Torah and to love Torah. Torah is Torah's emes, ein emes elo Torah, v'Hashalom Ahevu. And you will fix what broke the first Beis Hamikdash. You will fix what caused the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. Emes v'Shalom Ahevu. It is only then, and only then, that we can really hope that these days will be l'sosain, u'lesimcha, u'lemoyadim toim. So I have a chiddush in halacha. And whenever I say a chiddush, it's open for discussion. And if other people disagree, I don't mind. But this chiddush, I will fight anyone that disagrees, tooth and claw. And this is Torah Semis, and I will accept no dissent. And my chiddush is the Korah B'Yameinu, when we will be Zoicha, that these days will be L'Sosayin U'Lesimcha L'Moed Tovim. We will have 2 days Tisha B'Av, not 1 day. Because Rabbi Yochanan says, Ilu Havisi Hasam. If I would be there in the days of Chorb Mabayis, I would suggest that Asara B'Av needs to be the day of fasting and not Tisha B'Av. Because the Rubai Shal Heichel was burned on Asara B'Av. But the Chachamim of that day and age said, Atchalte de Paranusa Adifa, that the fast day should be when this tragedy began and not when it reached a climax. So why didn't they have 2 days Tisha B'Av? Because the Yerushalmi says, Avuhe Dishmor fasted 2 days on Yom Kippur and he died on the 2nd day. You can't fast 2 days. But what's the problem to dance and sing 2 days? We could do that. So the Korah B'Yameinu, when Tisha B'Av will be a Yom Tov, it's clear to me. We'll have 2 days Yom Tov, like 2 days Rosh Hashanah. Why not dance and sing and rejoice and thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu? 2 days. Tisha B'Av because it was Atchalte de Paranusa, Asara B'Av because Nislach Rubo Shal Heichel. So let us all hope and pray. We will try to be better. We will try to do more in learning Torah, supporting Torah, loving Torah, and we will finally learn to love and respect each other. And Ahavas Chinam will restore the base of Mikdash just like Sinas Chinam brought it down. And let us hope that we will be Zoicha. Tzama Ravi'i v'tzama Chamishit, tzama Shvi'i v'tzama Asiri, Yiyu lebeis Yehuda, l'sosayin, or l'simcha, or l'moyadim toivim, v'mhero v'yomeinu.